the Russians are now having to start recruiting in numbers ethnic Russian, Russians, white Russians. In other words, the kids of the elite who have been spared so far. So I think all of that is building ahead of steam.
Do you think we're starting to see the first cracks in Putin's resolve, and where he seems to have believed that Russia can win this war militarily? His energy infrastructure, or his oil and gas infrastructure, is being hit quite hard by the Ukrainians at the moment. The front line, there are talks about advances and then them being pushed back and Russia capturing more territory and the Ukrainians capturing a little bit back here and there. What's your reading from the front line right up to the operational level and of Putin potentially getting to this position where he suddenly realizes he can't win?
Yeah, no, I think there's quite a lot. And actually, if we go sort of start off in Russia, as you say, the oil industry has been really severely hit, particularly the ability to make petrol for cars. That it's not propaganda; it's reality. There is a shortage of petrol. Even the elites in St. Petersburg and Moscow are having to queue for petrol, and it's twice as expensive as it ever was. I mean, very interesting. There was a piece widely reported on various media a couple of days ago about people in St. Petersburg, singing songs in the main square about Putin's downfall. Now, that is rare. What is even rarer is that the Russian state police weren't there to beat them all up and chuck them away. So there does seem to be some disquiet. And for the Russians who, for your average rank and file Russian who has been suffering because of the expense the war is making for their food, they can't get fuel. If they can get a flight to Sochi to go and bathe in the Black Sea, they're delayed because there's a Ukrainian drone. They're just, people are getting hacked off. I think when you start going to the front line, as you said, not much has happened. Although this week there has been a really big, or over the last few weeks, a big build-up of Russian forces in the sort of Petrovsk area, and they were trying to do. There were reports of up to 60,000 Russians, but apparently most of those were prisoners, ex-prisoners, prisoners who've been released to go and fight in the front. Very little training, and supported allegedly by 300 tanks. But that thrust was very quickly dealt with, and masses of casualties. The UK MOD intelligence update, even up to a week or so ago, was saying the Russians are still losing 1,000 soldiers a day in some respects. So the war on the front's not going very well. To try and bolster the forces, they're putting untrained people, and again, reports coming out, and I admit they might not be coming from pro-Russian sources, is that the Russians are now having to start recruiting in numbers ethnic Russian, Russians, white Russians. In other words, the kids of the elite who have been spared so far. So I think all of that is building ahead of steam. The economy is really struggling, and again, the president of Finland today on Radio 4 was saying, that was what he was getting from his intelligence staffs and across Europe, that Russia is all its resources, all its sort of reserves that it's put by for a rainy day have gone. Very little money is coming in, particularly from oil at the moment. If the Indians stop buying oil, then things are getting really tough. So I think when you put all that together, and the fact that the Russian military have not really been able to do very much, you can see why something like Tomahawks could be, not necessarily a game changer for Ukraine, but a game changer for the Russians. So, is Putin about to be overthrown? Are there, people in the background waiting to stab in the back? Well, not obviously, but Russian leaders who don't fulfill their promises, and Putin's promise of subjugating Ukraine and everything else is looking really, really unlikely at the moment. So I think the pressure is ramping up, and that's why we're all hoping that Trump will do the right thing in Budapest and go for the jugular rather than offering Putin way out, which he, as you said earlier, sort of seemed to do in Alaska and that summit. So yeah, I think in Europe we must feel more confident. Hopefully, the Ukrainians are feeling more confident. But Putin, rather Trump, is the one who could probably tip them over the edge. So let's hope he does that rather than offer Putin a way out.
Yeah. We seem to focus on a lot of the time the fact that US support is critical, but you're right in you're saying Europe is stepping up. Do you think it's getting to the point now where actually the reliance on US support is beginning to wane and tail off, and actually Ukraine by itself and with support from Europe will have the ability to continue to fight at the levels it's been fighting at? And how do you think this is going to end up?
Well, I think if you look at it purely rationally from the capability that Europe has and is developing, one must come to the conclusion that, yeah, absolutely you can do that. I mean, the other thing the Finnish president said, just remember the Russian economy is pretty small.
Yeah.
It's I think it's either equivalent or smaller than Greece and a bit smaller than the Italian economy. Yep. So when you look at the financial muscle that Europe has, when you look at the forces that Europe has against what Russia, has today, or not perhaps that it had 3 or 4 years ago, you've got to come to the conclusion that actually, if we went all in, there is no reason at all that Ukraine wouldn't prevail. So yeah, if Trump walks away, I don't see the Russian hordes steaming, accelerating west, because I think Europe has the capability to do that. But a bit like Trump, Europe sort of ebbs and flows a little bit. Where individual leaders get focused a little bit on Ukraine one day and then are off on things the other day. And in this country, there's so many other issues that Starmer is dealing with, and he knows, and he's probably been told by his MPs that they want to stay in their jobs in 3 years' time, and winning in Ukraine might not be the way that they're going to do that. So it's a pretty complex issue, and I'm sure things look very different in Kyiv than they do in London and other European headquarters. But ultimately, of course, the Americans do have the ability themselves to shift the dial on most things on the planet, and this is something they could do it. But there will come to a point soon, I think, Philip, where perhaps Ukraine and Europe thinks, does the heavy involvement and heavy reliance on Trump make things better or worse in Ukraine? And I hope that if we decide that it's making things worse or not even changing anything, I hope that's where European leaders will step in and go, right, we'll take the lead from now on.
Yeah. But even when we compare the size difference between Russia from an economic perspective and even a military perspective and Europe, Putin seems to be taking the fight to Europe. We've had MiG-31 incursions into Estonian airspace. We've had drone overflights of German critical national infrastructure, Danish airfields, Swedish military. We've got constant threats against undersea cables and pipelines. We've got Russian spy ships around the coast of the UK and Ireland. Putin doesn't seem to be sitting back and going, we put aside the cyber threats that are coming in on a daily basis. He's not sitting on his hands and going, I'm really concerned. He seems to be taking the fight in the grey zone, as we refer to it, out into Europe and out into the rest of the world. Should we be concerned about that? Do you think he's going to ease back?
Well, as you will have seen, as I saw Baroness Manningham-Buller 2 weeks ago, was saying exactly what you said, Philip. We are already in a hybrid war with Russia, and to dismiss that will be at our peril. I know yesterday the head of MI5 was talking about similar stuff with the Chinese, but I think this is the way that Russia do business. You'll know better than anybody else that this is how they operate, try and have influence, try and destabilize ourselves, and we have got to be aware of that, and we have got to be, we have got to attack back. Now, I'm sure we are in various ways, but for anybody who thinks that sat in the home counties of England, you're well out of it. Well, actually, the next time you have a cyber issue and you can't board an aeroplane at Heathrow, don't assume that it's just bad luck, because a whole host of issues, be it the Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack or others, the intelligence services are saying the Russians might not be directly involved, but their DNA is all over it. So I think this is something that we have to accept. Russia is waging a physical war in Ukraine, but it's, as you say, it's fighting us in the grey zone as well. And we need to make sure that we're up to it and we're resilient and aware of it. We can't just, wish away these issues. This is the way that Putin operates. This is the way the Russians have always done it. This is what the Cold War was all about. We're now in a new, whatever you want to call it, hybrid war, Cold War, fighting in the grey zone. It's the reality of today, and we need to absolutely sort of front up to it and make sure that we're capable and resilient so that it doesn't adversely affect ourselves and our economy in the country.